Hi everyone, it's Nicole for Mama Elephant, and today I have a designer series card featuring the Pika Frames Creative Cuts. I've created a card here with a Christmas scene inside windows that open using the window frame die from the Pika Frame set, as well as the A2 size stitched rectangle. To begin my card, I am going to cut the A2 size using some smooth white cardstock using this stitched rectangle die, and I'll just simply cut that out first, and then I'm going to take the window die and position it so that the score side will open on the left side of the card and the other three edges will cut. With this die, one of the long sides is actually a score side instead of a cutting side. So it will not cut all the way through. That side right there, that it's not as near as thick as the three edges that will cut. So you'll definitely be able to tell which side it is that scores. So I've positioned it there so that the three sides to the left and to the top and bottom are about equal distance. I just eyeballed it, I didn't measure. And I've cut that out. You can see there that now that I have a score line on that side and the other three edges have cut. Now to cut my other windows so that I have windows that open up towards the center, I'm going to take my die and lay it down on my paper and kind of move it around until that's the cutting side lines up with that center line, and then I will tape it in place and run it through. This gives me windows that open. It may be, you can see there, it's just a tiny bit off, but really I can kind of clean that up with a snip of my scissors and it's not that noticeable. So I am going to take both of the windows now and I am going to fold them back and forth to score them really good. Use a bone folder to smooth them out. This will just help with the opening and closing of these windows once I have all the other elements in place that are going behind this cute window. So there is my piece of paper that I'm going to place on the back. I'm going to use a sheet of Tim Holtz watercolor paper that is already pre-sized to A2, so it's perfect for the front of a card. I've used a pencil to trace that bottom line of the bottom opening of my window frame. This is going to help me when lining up my stamping that I'm going to do for the inside window portion of the card. Now first I am going to take the water pitcher stamp from the Sweet Havana stamp set. And using the Weathered Wood Tim Holtz Distress marker, I'm going to ink up only the edges of my stamp. Because the distress inks and markers all work with water and react with water, I'm going to take a small fine tip paintbrush and just a tiny bit of water and pull that color from the edge of the design into this water pitcher and fill in the design this way. This softens the look and makes it much less harsh than it would if I just colored the entire thing and stamped it and then went over it. So I wanted that kind of gradient of color with the darker edges and then it lightens towards the center. I'm going to use a combination of floral and greenery images from both the Sweet Havana and Bloomsies stamp set. The pointy flower petal floral from Bloomsies here closely resembled a poinsettia, at least enough that I could use it to create a Christmas floral arrangement using both the large and small versions of that floral from the Bloomsies stamp set. I'm using the greenery here from Sweet Havana, and I simply removed part of that ink using my finger so that it wouldn't overlap the red portions of the flower, and then I'll use this taller kind of dotty type greenery to fill in. I feel like the more greenery you use in images like this, the more it gives it the illusion of an actual floral arrangement. So I really wanted to fill it in and make it very lush and green. I thought I would use that larger flower again, and I decided it was too big, so I went with my smaller one now. And this is simply building up that flower arrangement. So I'm adding greenery here and there, removing some of the ink using my finger. You could also use a cloth. I was just being a little bit lazy, so I used my finger. That way it doesn't overlap any of the red images. Used a second generation stamping for that other flower there. Once I kind of have the basic design of my floral arrangement, I can start going over it with a little bit of water on my paintbrush to soften and fill in the design. So I'm using those little dots again from Sweet Havana to really add in that greenery all around. Now there's quite a bit of white space you see still, which is, you want to leave a little bit to give that more natural look. But I decided to go ahead and start smoothing out some of these distress inks, and then I can build from there once I have this smoothed out, and it can dry a little bit while I work on adding in more color here and there. Now I don't have to actually stamp all of the greenery. I can, once I'm blending some of this here, I can pick up some of the ink and start filling in, which I'll do here a little bit. Just kind of filling in all those little areas. And then the top of my picture needed a little more definition, and so instead of stamping it, I simply used my marker and kind of drew in that line and smoothed it out. Adding a tiny bit of greenery hanging down the front of my picture there. If I had used a darker color for the picture, it would have been really hard to stamp over that. But where I used a very light color with that weathered wood distress marker, I'm able to add any of the greenery over it, which I'm using the forest moss and bundled sage inks, or distress marker inks, and those work well over top that light colored picture. Now I thought my arrangement needed a tiny bit more height, so I'm adding a little bit more of those little green dots. Smooth those out, and I can kind of fill in with those anywhere there's a little bit of white space. I just put a little green ink from the forest moss on my craft mat, and then with my damp paintbrush I picked up that ink, and then luckily that's on the back where I kind of smushed that on the back, but I'm drawing in some stems and filling in here and there to really give it a more lush and full appearance. Now there is a little flower center, I guess I would call it, from the Bloomsies stamp set, and I'm going to use some of the Fired Brick Distress Ink marker to simply stamp that over the center of these poinsettia flowers, created with the Festive Berries distress marker. It's not a huge difference. In fact, it wasn't quite as much as I had hoped for. So I did pick up a little bit of that forest moss distress ink and kind of color in the centers of my flowers just a tiny little bit. I'll add even more detail to those once that dries. Now to the side of my floral arrangement, I felt like it needed a little bit more greenery. So I like the look of some of the flowers lying next to the flower arrangement. Maybe like you got stopped in the middle of arranging them or whatever. So I stamped some greenery, and then I'm going to stamp some of these smaller red flowers. I'll smooth those out before I add anything else. Kind of build as you go. I felt like I needed a little bit darker greenery. I'm doing those little dots with the bundled sage and the leaves more with the forest moss. Kind of fill in here and there. And over to the right of my picture, I will take my paintbrush and just add a little bit of some simple dots with the tip of my paintbrush. Next, I'm going to go ahead, since this is dry, and remove my pencil line. I don't want that to accidentally show, so I'll make sure and get rid of that. And then I wanted the background of my card to have a tiny bit of color. It's a very white card, and all of the color comes in with the stamped and watercolored images. So I'm using a little tumbled glass, very watered down, and I'm going around the outside of my image really simply. I'm not getting too close. I don't want any of those colors to bleed out into what I'm doing, but it adds just enough color that it'll add a definition, especially when I pop that Pica frame over the top. Once that is completely dry, I will stamp my greeting from Merry Greetings using a black dye ink, and you can see how the design is coming together. Now, it would look fine the way it is here. However, I thought it would be fun to look like there are some hanging ornaments up above the greeting, and then maybe even a few ornaments lying on the countertop or table or wherever this picture is sitting in front of the window, to have a few little ornaments there. There are, I believe, 3 little bell designs in the Winter Wonderland stamp set, and the 2 larger ones work fairly well in scale and size with the design I have here. So I'm using those sort of like I would ornaments and stamping those right there along the table using some festive berries and mowed lawn distress ink and a little black soot for the top of those bells or ornaments. I don't want to add too much water to these because I don't want them to blend out too much. You'll lose any of the design. However, I did add just a tiny bit here and there where it needed to smooth out the ink. So there is what it looks like with some little ornaments, which I think is cute. I also stamped some hanging and added some lines with my black pen so it looks like they're hanging above there. I did not blend those out much with water. Instead, I used the Wink of Stella Clear Glitter Brush Marker, and that added a little bit of glitter, and the water in that pen did blend the bells out just a tiny bit. So I have adhered my frame, and actually I didn't show it here in the video, but I felt like it needed a little dimension, so I used foam tape underneath the outside of that, and it pops it up just a bit. Thanks for watching this video showcasing the new Pica Frames Creative Cuts dies from Mama Elephant. The supplies I've used are listed and linked below the video. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.